You know that feeling when you think, I'll just knock out this project real quick and then move on to the next thing, and then it ends up not quite working out that way? Well, that's exactly what happened with this video. This video was going to be called I Made a Tower Defense Game in a Day. Clearly, that's not what ended up happening. So let's take a look at how this little challenge project of mine turned into something much, much bigger. Tower defense game come with three main things to worry about. Number one being the towers, number two being the maps, and number three being a variety of enemies. Programming the individual enemies and towers would take a lot of time. Since I was aiming to make this game in a day, I wanted to focus on creating a lot of levels very quickly. So I started working on a level editor. This wouldn't only allow me to produce levels at a quick pace, but it would also allow players themselves to create levels of their own and share those with their friends. This would allow for near infinite content in a fairly quickly made game. I was sure that this was the best way to go. I couldn't rely on players to make their own towers or their own enemies, but I could rely on players to make their own levels. So with that, I got to work. I started by making a system that spawns tiles. These tiles then have a number of different types: an enemy spawner, a grass type, a path type, a water type, and an enemy goal. These would all do what you imagine they would. They spawn enemies, there are paths for enemies to walk down towards the goal, and the grass tiles would allow towers to be placed on them, where water tiles will actually block players from placing towers on top of them. When you open the level editor, it would spawn a clean level, all grass tiles, and then allow the player to edit these tiles by clicking on them. Once given a name and saved, you could load this level by inputting the same name, and it would generate the exact same level that you or your friend created. But here, I quickly ran into some major issues with the Unreal save system. Among all the things I've learned during this project, this was the one thing I can confidently say that I have learned. Where a month ago, saving and loading data in the Unreal Engine was a kind of magic to me. Now I get how it works, and it's become second nature. After a lot of debugging, there it was. The first version of a working level editor. It was rough, very rough indeed, but it would save and load my created levels now. The only issue? At this point, we were well into the evening of my one day of development. Still, it was worth trying to push to see how much I could make in a day. So my next question was one of navigation. My initial idea was giving each block a rotation, then setting the enemy to move to the location based on which direction the block is facing. But that will require a fair amount of work in both texturing for them to line up and programming the system, assuming I would run into a whole list of bugs that needed to be fixed. So instead I opted to use Unreal's built-in navigation systems. You see, no matter what I was going to do, the whole level would require a nav mesh to work anyway, so I might as well try to see what I can do with that. And I figured out I can make a simple system where every tile that is not supposed to be walkable will modify said nav mesh, leaving the built-in pathfinding of Unreal to do the job with countless hours of debugging for a custom system. Now, it wasn't perfect. The system would always take the shortest path, meaning that instead of straight lines like you'd assume you would have in a tower defense game, these enemies will now run diagonally from corner to corner. Hardly ideal, but for the time being, this should work well enough. I was reasonably sure that by the end of the night I could have made a somewhat playable tower defense game, but then I would have had one enemy, one tower, and a very, very janky level editor, and that just didn't seem acceptable. The next day I got to work, creating a tower object that worked much the same that my tiles did, giving them all an index value to tell which type of tower they were. This way I should easily be able to add new towers, just give them a different color scheme and make them spawn a different bullet. And there you go, you have a new tower. I made a normal tower, one that'll also deal fire damage, poison damage, and one that freezes. Now I have all the things I need for making towers in place, a total of 6 variables that I hook up and change as I see fit depending on what exactly it is the tower needs to do. So the game is finished, right? I didn't make it in a day, but I could still call this video I made a tower defense game in 48 hours, and that would still be plenty fine, but that's not what this video is called. So, time to get ready and package the game and publish it, right? Right? Well, would you believe me if I said that I forgot that I needed to be able to level up the towers? Because I did. This made the whole tower stat system a whole lot more complicated. It also meant that there was a lot more UI for me to make. Towers would need to have upgrades for each of their stats, but only the ones that were relevant to that particular tower. Needless to say, by the time I'd finished making all of this, hooking up all the right value into all the right stats, creating the balancing stats and increasing each level, the leveling up cost for each tower, you name it. Once again, on the second day, we had made it past sunset, and my day of development was almost over. And I needed to accept that what I was making here wasn't a tower defense game in a day. It wasn't a tower defense game in 48 hours. This was something much bigger. So if I just had one more day, I could polish up some things, and I could publish this game. With all that foundation built, I knew it was about time to finish up some things. I expanded the level editor, made the whole game just a little bit more usable, and called it finished. So I gave players full control over a number of different important aspects of the game. The amount of enemy spawns, the amount of HP they have, how powerful the towers are, their rate of fire, their range, how much player money you have at the start, how much HP the player has at the start. While this might sound simple, and yeah, it kind of was, my systems weren't designed with this in mind. So even adding these things wasn't very complex. Saving and loading these numbers in was once again a very tedious and time-consuming task. So while I was at it, I improved the level editor as well, allowing for a click and drag function, improving the looks of the UI, and making sure that when you try to edit a pre-existing level in the level editor, it won't override it with a blank one. By the time of the third day, I was finally packaging the game and uploaded it to itch.io. I was going to send it to some friends for a little bit of feedback, thinking there was only going to be a couple of small things that I might need to change around a little bit, and I was going to finally have this game finished. Oh god, how naive and how wrong I was about that. Later that night, I got some feedback. A large number of my towers had buggy UI, some development print strings were still left in the game, the towers, on long range, tended to miss a lot, the poison and fire damage were grossly unbalanced in later waves, and one hugely important feature was missing, the ability to save your progress between play sessions. Coming off the high of thinking I just finished this game, looking at this list of feedback, while all very valid points, I felt pretty defeated, and I honestly for the night just turned off my computer and I just was kind of done with it. But not for too long. The next day, I manned up, I opened Unreal and got to fixing these issues. Of course, most of the issues were simple improvements and balance changes, hooking up some nodes that I hadn't connected, filling some empty arrays and programming some movement prediction into my towers. This all wasn't too bad. However, the save and continue system threw me for a bit of a loop. Much like when I had added the stat modifiers in my level editor, I was now forced to make a feature that I hadn't taken into consideration when creating my initial systems. Nothing impossible, but still, it's like trying to fit the square block into the circular hole. With enough brute forcing and bending over backwards, it'll work, but it was clearly not meant to be done this way. Altogether, I didn't have to change that much about my initial systems and managed to make it work, but things are kinda programmed pretty messy. And right now, before I would move on to building on top of this game, I need to go back over and rework a lot of things to make them more efficient. Both in terms of computing power, there's no use in having a lot of duplicate code for instance, but also in terms of my own sanity as a developer. Having to find a bug in this code is going to be like finding a needle in the haystack that is the Matrix. So here we have it, the final game, or rather a final game. Because as this game is published on itch.io now, you can download it and play it down below in the description. I'm still going to be building upon this. I'm going to also use this as the basis to develop a full release tower defense game over the next year or so. Even since the editing for this video has started, I've made so many changes and so much progress to the tower defense engine that I've made here. It could be an entire video in and of itself, really. For now, I'll leave you with 3 things. Number 1, you can get what I made here as a tower defense engine for Unreal Engine on the Unreal Marketplace down below in the description. Number 2, the actual game that is based on this will also be linked down below in the description on itch.io. And number 3, most importantly, my promise that I will be working on a full-fledged tower defense game sometime over the next year or so. Don't pin me down on any dates, because I'm also working on some very interesting other projects in the meantime.